I used to believe that family came before everything else until that Thanksgiving evening when I sat alone at the kitchen counter. My name is Margaret Wilson. Everyone calls me Maggie. At 62, I'd spent most of my life building something from nothing. The kind of nothing that comes from growing up in a trailer park on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, with a mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. The kind of nothing that makes you promise yourself that one day your children will never know what it feels like to go to bed hungry. That promise drove me through community college while working full-time at a local diner. It pushed me to get my real estate license when I was 23, pregnant with my daughter Eliza, and terrified of what the future might hold. Brian, her father, had already disappeared by then, leaving nothing but a hastily scribbled note on our kitchen table and empty spaces in the closet where his clothes used to hang. "You'll never make it on your own," my mother had said, not unkindly, just stating what she believed was fact. "Come back home, Maggie, at least until the baby comes." But I didn't. I couldn't. I had made a promise. So I worked. I sold houses during the day, showing properties with my growing belly, smiling through the sidelong glances of couples who wondered if I was stable enough to handle their investment. At night, I took online business courses, falling asleep with textbooks splayed across my chest, waking up at dawn to start again. By the time Eliza was 5, I had my own small real estate agency. By the time she was 10, I had expanded to 3 offices across Portland. And by the time she graduated high school, I had built Wilson Realty into one of the largest independent real estate companies in Oregon, with 15 offices and over 100 agents. I never remarried. There were men, of course. Brief relationships that fizzled out when they realized my business would always come first. Not because I loved it more than them, but because it was what secured Eliza's future. And hers was the only future I truly cared about. Eliza grew up beautiful, intelligent, and kind. She had my stubborn determination, but none of my rough edges. Where I was blunt, she was diplomatic. Where I saw business opportunities, she saw people. She was everything I had hoped she would be, and when she got accepted to Stanford on a partial scholarship, I didn't even blink at covering the rest. I had built my empire for this very reason. That's where she met David. Handsome, charismatic David Prescott, with his perfect teeth and his family's old money. The kind of money that didn't need to announce itself because it was evident in everything, from his casual confidence to the way he held his silverware. The Prescotts owned shipping companies, tech startups, and from what I gathered, half of San Francisco's prime real estate. I still remember the first time Eliza brought him home during spring break of her junior year. The way she looked at him made my heart both soar and sink. She was in love, deeply, irrevocably in love, with a man who came from a world entirely different from ours. "Mom, this is David," she had said, her eyes sparkling. He had extended his hand, firm handshake, direct eye contact. "Mrs. Wilson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Eliza talks about you all the time." His smile was practiced, perfect. I couldn't help but wonder if his parents had paid for orthodontics, or if that too had come naturally to him. "Please, call me Maggie," I had replied, forcing warmth into my voice despite the slight knot forming in my stomach. I recognized his type immediately, the privileged golden boy who had never had to worry about how the bills would get paid. Over dinner at my home, a spacious Tudor-style house in Portland's West Hills that I had purchased as a gift to myself. When I turned 50, David charmed me with stories about his family's charitable foundation and his plans to join his father's investment firm after graduation. "And what about you, Eliza? Still planning on that nonprofit work?" I had asked, slicing into my steak. Eliza had glanced at David before answering. "Actually, I've been thinking about getting my MBA instead. David's father knows some people at Harvard Business School." I had nodded slowly, trying not to show my surprise. My daughter, who had spent her high school years volunteering at homeless shelters and once told me she wanted to change the world, not just profit from it, was now talking about Harvard Business School and connections. After they left to meet some of Eliza's old friends, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the taillights of David's rented BMW disappear down the driveway, and wondered if I should be concerned. But then I reminded myself that this was what I had worked for, to give Eliza choices, opportunities, access to a world beyond the one I had grown up in. If she chose David and his world, wasn't that her? Right? They married 2 years after graduation in a lavish ceremony at the Prescott family estate in Napa Valley. I wrote a check for half the wedding costs, though I suspected my contribution was more symbolic than necessary. The guest list included tech CEOs, a former state governor, and celebrities whose names I recognized from magazines. I sat in the front row, in a designer dress that cost more than my mother had made in 3 months, and tried not to feel like an outsider. Richard Prescott, David's father, had given me a firm handshake and a polite smile at the rehearsal dinner. Maggie, we're so happy to welcome Eliza into our family. She's a remarkable young woman. You must be very proud. I am, I had replied simply, and grateful that she's found someone who makes her happy. His wife, Vivian, had been less warm. Her eyes had assessed me with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to categorizing people by their usefulness or status. Eliza mentioned you're in real estate? How charming. We have a few properties ourselves, of course. Nothing major, just some holdings in San Francisco and a few developments in emerging markets. I had smiled tightly. Wilson Realty has been doing well. I just closed on a new development project in Southeast Portland last month. She had nodded vaguely, already looking past me for someone more interesting to talk to. After the wedding, Eliza and David moved to San Francisco, where he joined his father's firm and she enrolled in business school. I visited when I could, staying in hotels rather than imposing on their small but expensive condo in Pacific Heights. Each visit, I noticed Eliza changing in subtle ways. Her wardrobe became more polished, her opinions more aligned with David's, her calls to me less frequent. 3 years later, they announced they were moving back to Portland. David was opening a branch of Prescott Investments there, and they wanted to start a family away from the hustle of San Francisco. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I had said over the phone, genuinely thrilled to have her closer. If you need help finding a house, you know who to call. There had been a slight pause. Actually, Mom, David's parents already purchased something for us. As a surprise. It's in Lakewood Heights. My heart had sunk slightly. Lakewood Heights was a new luxury development on the west side of the city, one I had actually tried to invest in 2 years prior, but had been outbid by an anonymous holding company. The irony wasn't lost on me. That's very generous of them, I had managed to say. They want us to have stability before the baby comes, Eliza had replied, and then rushed on with the second announcement. She was pregnant. My grandson Thomas was born 7 months later. He had Eliza's dark hair and what seemed to be David's already serious expression. The first time I held him, looking down at his tiny, perfect face, I felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly knocked me off my feet. He's perfect, I had whispered, blinking back tears. David had stood nearby, proud and somewhat proprietary. The first male Prescott of his generation, my father's over the moon. I had chosen to ignore the comment, focusing instead on the miracle, in my arms. As Thomas grew, I tried to be present without being intrusive. I knew the delicate balance of being a mother-in-law, especially to someone like David who clearly had definite ideas about family hierarchy. I brought gifts but asked before stopping by. I offered advice only when requested. I swallowed my opinions about their parenting choices unless directly asked. But despite my careful navigation, I sensed a growing distance. Invitations to dinner became less frequent. When I did visit, conversations often revolved around people I didn't know. The Prescott's friends, David's business associates, the other young families in Lakewood Heights who all seemed to have similar backgrounds and lifestyles. It was during this period that Wilson Realty faced its biggest opportunity yet, A massive tract of undeveloped land just outside Portland had become available, nearly 2,000 acres with zoning potential, for mixed residential and commercial use. The development would be called Riverside Pines, and it had the potential to transform the area and double the size of my company. I threw myself into securing the financing, working 18-hour days, leveraging everything I had built over the decades. The negotiations were brutal, with several larger development companies from Seattle and California competing for the deal. I called in every favor, used every connection, and pushed my team harder than ever before. When I finally signed the papers, making Riverside Pines mine, I was exhausted but exhilarated. This wasn't just another development. This was my legacy. The project would take years to complete, but it would secure Wilson Realty's future, and by extension, Thomas's future, should he ever need it. I tried to share my excitement with Eliza over lunch the following week, but she seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. "Mom, that's great," she had said, glancing up briefly. "David says the real estate market is overheated right now, though. Are you sure the timing is right for something this big?" I had blinked, taken aback. "I've been doing this for nearly 40 years, Eliza. I think I know when to make a move in the market." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course. I didn't mean... It's just what David's analysts are saying." I had changed the subject, asking about Thomas instead, and she had brightened immediately, showing me pictures of his recent play date with the son of David's new business partner. A few months later, as the initial groundbreaking for Riverside Pines approached, I received an unexpected call from Richard Prescott himself. He wanted to have lunch. Curious and slightly wary, I had agreed. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with no prices on the menu and sommeliers who hovered attentively. Richard had greeted me with that same firm handshake and practiced smile. "Maggie, thank you for making the time. I know how busy you must be with your new project." I had nodded, waiting for him to get to the point. Richard Prescott was not a man who did social calls without purpose. "I'll be direct," he had continued, after ordering an expensive bottle of wine without consulting me. "Prescott Investments has been looking to expand our Portland portfolio, and we've been particularly interested in the area where you're developing Riverside Pines." I had taken a slow sip of water. "It's a prime location. Took me a year of negotiations to secure it." He had smiled, a flash of perfect teeth much like his son's. "Exactly why I wanted to talk. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer, to take the project off your hands, complete reimbursement of your costs thus far, plus a substantial profit margin. You could walk away now with more than you'd likely make after years of development headaches." The offer, when he named the figure, was indeed generous, on paper. But I knew what Riverside Pines could become. I knew its true potential value. "I appreciate the offer, Richard, but Riverside Pines isn't for sale. It's not just about the profit margin for me. This is Wilson Realty's future." His smile had tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand ambition, Maggie. I built Prescott Investments, from a modest family office to what it is today, but sometimes the smart play is knowing when to cash out, especially at our age." "Our age?" I had repeated, eyebrows raised. He had backpedaled smoothly. "I just mean that developments of this scale are marathons, not sprints. 5-7 years before full realization of the investment. Wouldn't you rather enjoy the fruits of your labor now? Spend more time with Thomas, perhaps?" It was the mention of my grandson that had clarified things for me. This wasn't just business. This was personal. For whatever reason, Richard Prescott wanted Riverside Pines, and he was willing to use my family connections as leverage. "My company is perfectly positioned to see this through, Richard. But thank you for your concern." He had nodded slowly, swirling the wine in his glass. "Of course. It was just an idea. Family working together and all that. I know David and Eliza would be pleased to see us collaborating." I doubted that very much, especially given Eliza's recent parroting of David's market concerns, but I had simply smiled and steered the conversation to more neutral topics. After that lunch, I noticed a further cooling in my relationship with David. Invitations to their home became even more infrequent, and when I did visit, he was often working, late, or had urgent calls to make. Eliza seemed torn, clearly uncomfortable with the tension but unwilling or unable to address it directly. I focused on Riverside Pines, throwing myself into the project with renewed determination. The initial phases went well: infrastructure, development, preliminary construction, marketing campaigns that generated significant interest. I was at the construction site almost daily, overseeing details, making decisions, building my legacy brick by brick. Then came the call from Eliza. That changed everything. "Mom, we're hosting Thanksgiving this year. The whole Prescott family is coming to Portland. Richard and Vivian, David's sister Charlotte and her husband, even his grandmother from Boston. We'd love for you to join us, of course." I had paused in the middle of reviewing architectural plans, surprised by the invitation after months of distance. "I'd love to, sweetheart. What can I bring?" "Nothing. David's hired a catering team from that new restaurant downtown. Everything's taken care of." I had ignored the slight sting that came with being treated as just another guest rather than family who might contribute to the meal. "What time should I arrive?" "Dinner's at 6, but people will start arriving around 4 for drinks." It was only after hanging up that I realized she hadn't said, "Family will start arriving," but "people will start arriving," as if I wasn't quite in the same category as the Prescotts. The day before Thanksgiving, I had received another surprising call, this one from my company's legal team. They had been approached with a complex offer regarding Riverside Pines. A holding company was attempting to purchase several key adjacent properties and was proposing a joint venture. The holding company's name wasn't familiar, but something about the timing and approach made me suspicious. "Send me everything," I had instructed my lawyer, "and find out who's behind this holding company." The documentation had arrived by courier within the hour, and I had spent the evening reviewing it, my suspicions growing with each page. The proposal was carefully constructed to seem beneficial to Wilson Realty, but the fine print told a different story, one that would ultimately give the mystery partner controlling interest in the most lucrative phases of development. A text from my lawyer had confirmed what I already suspected. The holding company traced back through several shells to Prescott Investments. I had sat back in my office chair, staring out at the Portland skyline, anger and disappointment warring within me. So Richard had decided to go around me after I declined his lunch offer. And based on the timing, this had been in the works for a while, possibly even before our lunch meeting, which had likely been just a courtesy or a test to see if I could be easily persuaded. I looked at the time, nearly midnight. Thanksgiving was hours away. I would be sitting at the table with the man who was actively trying to undermine what might be the crowning achievement of my career. And his son, who had been growing increasingly cold toward me, was married to my only child. For a brief, weary moment, I considered backing out of the dinner, claiming illness or an emergency. But that wouldn't solve the underlying issue, and it would only hurt Eliza, who was caught in the middle whether she realized it or not. No. I decided as I closed the file and prepared for bed, I would go to Thanksgiving dinner. I would be polite and pleasant. I would focus on my grandson and daughter. And I would deal with Richard Prescott's business maneuvers through the proper channels, with my lawyers and my team, not across a dinner table laden with turkey and cranberry sauce. What I didn't anticipate was just how difficult that resolution would be to maintain, or how the evening would unfold in ways I never could have predicted. I arrived at Eliza and David's Lakewood Heights home at precisely 4:15 the next day, dressed in a deep burgundy dress that had cost more than my first month's rent back when Eliza was a baby. I carried a small gift for Thomas, a handcrafted wooden train set from a local artisan, and a bottle of expensive champagne, though Eliza had said not to bring anything. The house was impressive, I had to admit. Over 5,000 square feet of tasteful luxury with soaring ceilings, custom millwork, and expansive windows overlooking professionally landscaped grounds that sloped down toward the lake. The Prescott's wedding present had certainly been generous. A uniformed server opened the door, greeting me with a polite nod. "Name, please?" I blinked in surprise. "Margaret Wilson. I'm Eliza's mother." "Yes, Ms. Wilson. The family is gathered in the main living room. Family, not guests." I noted the distinction as I followed him through the marble-floored entryway, past what appeared to be a newly installed sculptural piece that hadn't been there during my last visit. The living room was already filled with people. The Prescott clan, immediately identifiable by their similar features and bearing. Richard stood near the fireplace, tumbler of amber liquid in hand, holding court with two men I didn't recognize. Vivian sat on one of the cream-colored sofas, engaged in conversation, with a slender older woman who I assumed was David's grandmother. Charlotte, David's sister, whom I had met at the wedding, was inspecting the elaborate flower arrangements on the dining table visible through the archway. David was pouring drinks at the built-in bar, while Eliza moved between groups, the perfect hostess in a navy blue dress that looked new and expensive. Thomas was nowhere to be seen, likely with a nanny somewhere in the sprawling house. It was Eliza who spotted me first, her face lighting up with genuine warmth that eased some of my tension. "Mom, you made it." She crossed the room to embrace me, the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one I had given her for her college graduation, enveloping me briefly. "Wouldn't miss it, sweetheart," I replied, returning her hug before stepping back to take in her appearance. "You look beautiful." "Thanks, Mom. David picked this out for our anniversary last month." She turned slightly, calling out, "David, Mom's here." He looked up from the bar, his expression carefully pleasant as he approached. "Maggie, good to see you. What can I get? You to drink? We have a fantastic Pinot Noir from a vineyard just outside Dundee." "That sounds perfect, thank you," I said, matching his tone of polite cordiality. As David went to fetch the wine, Eliza took the champagne and gift from my hands. "You didn't have to bring anything, but thank you. Thomas will love this. He's upstairs with Marina. We hired a sitter to keep him occupied until dinner." I nodded, trying not to show my disappointment. I had hoped to spend time with my grandson, especially since it had been nearly 3 weeks since I'd seen him. "I'll make sure you get some time with him before dinner," Eliza added, seeming to read my thoughts. "Let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes, small talk, and careful navigation of potential conversational landmines. I complimented Vivian on her statement necklace, discussed the unseasonably dry Portland autumn with Charlotte's husband James, and exchanged pleasantries with David's grandmother Adelaide, who assessed me with the same measuring gaze Vivian had used years ago at the wedding. I managed to avoid direct interaction with Richard until David announced it was time to move to the dining room, and we all began to shift in that direction. "Maggie," Richard's voice came from just behind me, causing me to turn. "Lovely to see you again. How's the development business treating you these days?" The calculated casualness of his tone made my spine stiffen, but I kept my expression neutral. "Quite well, thank you. Riverside Pines is progressing ahead of schedule, actually." Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance perhaps, or calculation. "Is that so? I understood there were some complications with the eastern parcel zoning." So, he had been keeping very close tabs on my project. The eastern parcel zoning issue had only arisen the previous week and had been resolved within days. It wasn't public knowledge. "Nothing my team couldn't handle," I replied smoothly. "We have excellent relationships with the city planning department." He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. Relationships are crucial in real estate, aren't they? At every level. The implied threat wasn't lost on me, but before I could respond, David was at his father's elbow. "Dad, Mom wants you at the head of the table." They're about to serve the first course. Richard gave me a final appraising look before turning away. We'll continue this conversation later, Maggie. I watched them walk toward the dining room, both tall and straight-backed, both in dark suits that probably cost what my first agents had made in a month. For a brief moment, I felt a flash of the old insecurity. The trailer park girl from East Portland trying to play in leagues beyond her station. But I quickly pushed it aside. I had earned my place at any table in this city, including this one. The dining room was a showcase of Thanksgiving perfection. A massive table that could comfortably seat 16 was set for the 10 of us, with fine china, crystal glassware, and elaborate floral centerpieces in fall colors. A team of servers stood ready along the wall, while a woman who appeared to be the head caterer was giving final instructions near the entrance to the kitchen. I looked for my name card, moving along the length of the table. Adelaide at one end, Richard at the other, Vivian to Richard's right, Charlotte to his left, David beside his mother, Eliza beside Charlotte. I continued moving, checking each place setting, but didn't see my name. Eliza appeared at my side, her expression strangely uncomfortable. Mom, there's been a slight change of plans with the seating. I turned to her, already sensing what was coming. The caterer says there's an issue with one of the main courses, and they need more room to work in the kitchen so they can only serve 9 at the main table properly, she continued, her words coming faster as she avoided my eyes. So we thought, David suggested, would you mind terribly eating in the kitchen nook? It's still a beautiful setting, and you'll get served all the same courses. I stared at my daughter, the daughter I had raised alone, the daughter for whom I had built an empire from nothing. You want me to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone in the kitchen? She flushed, glancing nervously toward David, who was watching our interaction from across the room. Not alone, exactly. Marina will bring Thomas down to sit with you for dessert. And it's the breakfast nook, not the kitchen itself. It has a lovely view of the garden. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I see. It's just for this dinner, Mom. The Prescotts haven't all been together in Portland before, and David wants everything to be perfect for his grandmother. She's quite traditional about family holidays. But apparently, I wasn't quite family enough. I could have made a scene. I could have turned and walked out, dignity intact. I could have reminded my daughter of all the Thanksgiving dinners I had prepared in our small apartment when she was young, when I had worked double shifts the day before to afford a proper turkey. Instead, I smiled tightly. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes things easier. Relief flooded her face. Thank you for understanding. I'll have them bring you each course right away, so you won't have to wait. She led me to the kitchen nook, a small round table in an alcove off the main kitchen, set with a single place setting that, while elegant, was clearly not the same fine china being used in the dining room. Through the doorway, I could see the Prescott family taking their seats, David pulling out Eliza's chair with practiced chivalry. Can I get you more wine before I go back? Eliza asked, already inching toward the dining room. I'm fine, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Go enjoy your dinner, Eliza. As she disappeared back to the main dining room, one of the servers approached with my first course, a small plate of delicately arranged scallops. I thanked her automatically, then sat alone at the small table, listening to the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter from the other room. I took a bite of the perfectly seared scallop, tasting nothing. My mind was racing, processing not just the humiliation of the moment, but the larger pattern it represented. I thought about Richard's attempts to take over Riverside Pines, about David's growing coldness, about Eliza's gradual transformation into someone who would ask her own mother to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone in the kitchen. And as I sat there, fork suspended midair, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't just about a dinner seating arrangement. This was about respect, about recognition, about understanding one's true place in others' lives. I set down my fork, pulled my phone from my purse, and discreetly sent a text message to my lawyer. Proceed with Plan B for Riverside Pines. Immediately. Then, I sent a second text to my assistant. Remember that property acquisition we discussed last month? The one in Lakewood Heights? Execute all paperwork tomorrow morning, first thing. Use the offshore account. What David and his family didn't know, what no one knew except my closest advisors, was that over the past 6 months, while Richard Prescott had been maneuvering to gain control of Riverside Pines, I had been quietly, systematically purchasing every available property in Lakewood Heights through a series of shell companies and foreign investors, including the country club that served as the development's social hub, including the 4 houses adjacent to David and Eliza's, including the remaining undeveloped lots. The final piece had been negotiating with the developer who held controlling interest in the homeowners association, a deal that had been pending, awaiting my final approval. I had been hesitant, worried about how it might affect my relationship with Eliza if she discovered what I was doing. But sitting there in that kitchen nook, listening to the Prescott family laughing without me, I realized that relationship had already been compromised beyond what I had been willing to admit. I took a sip of the expensive wine, feeling the weight of decades of sacrifice and hard work behind my decision. By tomorrow afternoon, I would own not just Riverside Pines, but the entirety of Lakewood Heights, the very community where David and Eliza's perfect house sat, the house his parents had so generously gifted them. The server returned to clear my barely touched first course and deliver the second, a small bowl of butternut squash soup garnished with creme fraiche and truffle oil. I thanked her again, smiling now with genuine warmth. "Is everything to your liking, Ms. Wilson?" she asked, clearly noticing my change in demeanor. "Everything," I replied, "is about to be exactly as it should be." As I lifted the spoon to my lips, I heard Richard Prescott's distinctive laugh echo from the dining room, followed by David's matching tone, the sound of men who believed they were untouchable, who had never known what it meant to be dismissed or diminished. I smiled to myself, tasting the rich soup with new appreciation. They had no idea what was coming. But they would learn very soon that Margaret Wilson had not built her empire by allowing others to determine her worth or her place. The table in the kitchen might be small, but by this time tomorrow, I would own the entire subdivision, their supposed sanctuary, and every inch of ground beneath their perfectly polished shoes. I savored each bite of the gourmet meal that night, alone at my little kitchen table, with a newfound sense of resolve. The servers were attentive, perhaps more attentive to me than to the dining room, their sympathetic glances making it clear they understood the dynamics at play. When the young woman with the short dark hair brought me the main course, a perfectly roasted slice of turkey with chestnut stuffing and cranberry reduction, she leaned in slightly. "Just so you know," she whispered, "we think it's awful what they're doing. My grandmother would never stand for treating family this way." I gave her a small smile. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Sophia," she replied. "Well, Sophia, sometimes family is defined by actions, not blood. Remember that." She nodded, seeming to absorb my words with genuine interest before quietly returning to her duties. When dessert arrived, an elaborate pumpkin cheesecake with spiced caramel, I heard the patter of small feet on the hardwood floors moments before. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, escorted by a young woman who must have been Marina, the nanny. "Nana!" he exclaimed, his 4-year-old exuberance unfiltered and pure. He broke away from Marina and raced toward me, arms outstretched. I set down my dessert fork and opened my arms, lifting him onto my lap as he collided with me. "There's my boy," I said, breathing in the clean, soapy scent of his hair. "Are you having a good Thanksgiving?" He nodded against my shoulder. "Marina made me watch movies upstairs. I wanted to come down, but Daddy said not until dessert." I caught Marina's eye over Thomas's head. She gave me an apologetic shrug. "Mr. Prescott was very specific about the schedule," she explained softly. "Of course he was," I murmured, hugging Thomas a little tighter. "Well, I'm glad you're here now. Would you like to share my cheesecake? Thomas pulled back, his eyes, so like Eliza's, lighting up at the mention of dessert. Yes, please. I handed him my fork, watching as he dug into the cheesecake with enthusiasm, getting caramel on his chin in the process. This was what mattered, I reminded myself. Not the dining room politics, not Richard Prescott's business maneuvers, not even David's thinly veiled disdain. This little boy, with his sticky fingers and uninhibited affection, he was my legacy far more than any real estate development. Nana, when can I come to your house again? You promised to show me how to make those cookies with the chocolate inside. Very soon, I promised, wiping caramel from his chin with my napkin. Maybe this weekend? Marina cleared her throat. I believe Thomas has swimming lessons on Saturday and a play date on Sunday with the Morton children. The Morton children. Undoubtedly the offspring of some Prescott family connection, being groomed for the right social circles from preschool. Perhaps, next week then, I suggested, keeping my tone light. We'll find a time, won't we, Thomas? He nodded enthusiastically, his mouth now full of cheesecake. A moment later, David appeared in the doorway, his expression tightening when he saw Thomas perched on my lap. There you are. Grandmother Adelaide is asking for you, Thomas. She wants to give you your Thanksgiving gift before they leave. Thomas looked reluctant, his small hand gripping my arm. Can Nana come too? David's gaze flickered to me, then back to his son. Grandmother is quite tired and will be leaving directly after. The gift. Maybe another time. I squeezed Thomas gently before setting him down. Go on, sweetheart. Don't keep your great-grandmother waiting. We'll plan that cookie baking soon. He gave me a final hug before scampering off, Marina following closely behind. David lingered in the doorway, his tall frame blocking part of the light from the hallway. Hope the meal was satisfactory, he said stiffly. I met his gaze steadily. The food was excellent. Your caterers know their business. He nodded, his hand resting on the doorframe. Eliza wanted me to check if you needed anything. Eliza could have checked herself, I pointed out mildly. Something like discomfort flashed across his face. She's saying goodbye to my family. Grandmother, Adelaide doesn't travel often at her age. This visit is important. Everything about your family seems to be important, David, I replied, keeping my voice level. I just wonder where exactly my daughter and grandson fit into the hierarchy. His jaw tightened. Eliza is my wife and Thomas is a Prescott. They are exactly where they should be. The possessiveness in his tone made something cold slide down my spine. Thomas is also a Wilson, I reminded him. Never forget that. For a moment, we stared at each other, the air charged with unspoken challenges. Then he straightened, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. The servers will help with anything else you need. I should get back. After he left, I sat alone with the remainder of my cheesecake, turning over the brief interaction in my mind. There had been something different in David's demeanor, a hint of defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Perhaps Richard had shared his business concerns about me, or perhaps David was simply uncomfortable with the obvious slight of relegating me to the kitchen. Either way, I had no intention of playing the role of the wounded mother-in-law. My plans were already in motion, the wheels turning without their knowledge. I finished my dessert, thanked the servers, and retrieved my coat from the front closet myself, slipping out without further goodbyes. The night air was crisp with late November chill, stars visible in the clear sky above the manicured trees of Lakewood Heights. As I walked to my car, I noticed lights in various windows of the grand homes lining the street, families gathered together, sharing meals, creating memories. Tomorrow, I would own every inch of this pristine development. The thought no longer brought me just satisfaction, but a strange sort of melancholy. What good was winning if it drove an irreparable wedge between Eliza and me? What value did property have compared to family? But then I remembered the sight of Eliza seated at the Prescott table while I dined alone in the kitchen, and my resolve hardened again. Some lessons needed to be taught, even if they hurt in the teaching. The next morning, I awoke at 5, a habit formed over decades of early starts to beat competitors to opportunities. I made myself a strong cup of coffee and reviewed the final acquisition documents my assistant had emailed overnight. Everything was in order: funds positioned for transfer, paperwork prepared for signatures. By noon, Lakewood Heights would be mine. At 7, my phone rang. My lawyer, Marcus Donovan, who had been with me for nearly 20 years. "Morning, Maggie. Just checking if you're still firm on this. Once we execute, there's no turning back. The Prescotts will know it was you. Eventually." "I'm aware," I replied, gazing out my home office window at the Portland skyline, misty in the early morning light. "Proceed as planned. And Marcus, make sure the transfer of the HOA control happens simultaneously. I want everything locked down before anyone realizes what's happening." "Understood. I'll call when it's done." I spent the morning at the Riverside Pine site, inspecting progress on the infrastructure phase, conferring with project managers, making decisions about materials and timelines. Being on site always centered me, reminding me of the tangible results of my decades of work. Here, I wasn't someone's mother or grandmother or in-law. I was Margaret Wilson, developer and CEO, respected for my expertise and vision. At 11:47, my phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "It's done. Congratulations. You now own Lakewood Heights." I stood on a rise overlooking what would eventually be the Central Park of Riverside Pines, letting the reality sink in. I had just committed over $30 million to purchase an entire luxury development, not because it was a sound business decision, though it wasn't a poor one, but because my son-in-law and his family had made me eat Thanksgiving dinner. In the kitchen, put that way, it seemed like an extreme reaction. But it wasn't about the dinner, not really. It was about respect, about boundaries, about showing people that their actions had consequences, especially when those people believed themselves above such mundane concerns. "Ms. Wilson," my site manager approached, hard hat in hand. "The engineering team needs a decision on the retention pond placement. Do you have a minute?" I nodded, pushing thoughts of the Prescotts aside. "Show me the options." By late afternoon, I had almost forgotten about Lakewood Heights, immersed as I was in the details of Riverside Pines. Then my phone rang. Eliza. I stepped away from the noise of construction equipment to answer. "Mom." Her voice sounded strained. "Can you come over? Something strange is happening, and Dad isn't answering his phone." I checked my watch. "I'm at the construction site. What's going on?" "There are people here, officials from the Homeowners Association and some lawyers. They say there's an emergency meeting tonight that all residents must attend. David's in San Francisco for the day, and I can't reach him. Can you come help me figure out what's happening?" I closed my eyes briefly. I hadn't anticipated that the HOA would move quite so quickly to announce the change in ownership. Part of me had hoped to break the news to Eliza privately, to explain my reasons before she was blindsided. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I promised, already moving toward my car. When I arrived at their house, Eliza was pacing in the foyer, still dressed in yoga clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that reminded me of her teenage years. She looked younger, more vulnerable without her carefully applied makeup and designer clothes. "Mom, thank God," she said, embracing me briefly. "I don't understand what's happening. 2 board members from the HOA came by personally to deliver this." She handed me an official-looking letter on Lakewood Heights Homeowners Association letterhead, announcing an emergency session at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse to discuss significant changes in development ownership and management affecting all residents. I scanned the document, noting the carefully neutral language that revealed nothing about the nature of the changes. My lawyers had drafted it well. "Have you tried calling David again?" I asked, handing the letter back. She nodded, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear, another gesture from her youth that emerged when she was stressed. He's in meetings all day with potential investors. His assistant said she'd try to get a message to him, but he probably won't see it until his dinner tonight. I moved further into the house, noting the faint scent of pumpkin and cinnamon that lingered from yesterday's festivities. "Where's Thomas?" "Upstairs with Marina." I didn't want him to see me worried. Eliza followed me into the kitchen, the main kitchen, not the breakfast nook where I'd eaten my Thanksgiving dinner. "What do you think this is about? Are they raising the HOA fees again? The last increase was just 6 months ago, and David was furious." I leaned against the marble-topped island. "I don't think it's about fees, Eliza." Something in my tone made her look at me more closely. "You know something. What is it?" I met her gaze steadily. "The ownership of Lakewood Heights has changed hands. That's what the meeting is about." Her brow furrowed. "Changed hands? What does that mean? Who bought it?" "I did." Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes widening as she processed my words. "You bought Lakewood Heights? The entire development? Why would you do that?" I took a deep breath. "It's a sound investment. Property values in this area have been steadily increasing, and the remaining undeveloped lots have significant potential." She stared at me, disbelief clear in her expression. "That's not why, not entirely. What's really going on, Mom?" "Did you enjoy your Thanksgiving dinner, Eliza?" I asked quietly. She blinked, thrown by the apparent change of subject. Yes, it went well. Grandmother Adelaide was pleased with everything." "Why?" "And did you at any point consider how I might have felt eating alone in the kitchen while you sat with the Prescotts?" Color rose in her cheeks. "Mom, I told you it was just a seating issue. The caterers needed—" "Don't," I interrupted, raising a hand. "Don't repeat that excuse. We both know what happened yesterday. I was deliberately excluded because I don't fit into the Prescott family image. Because David, or perhaps his parents, decided I wasn't important enough to sit at the main table." Eliza crossed her arms, defensiveness creeping into her posture. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was one dinner." "It wasn't just the dinner," I said, keeping my voice measured. "It's been a pattern for years. The gradual distancing, the way David speaks to me, the fact that I have to schedule appointments essentially to see my own grandson. And it's not just personal, Eliza. Did you know your father-in-law tried to take over Riverside Pines? That he's been actively working to undermine my business?" She shook her head, confusion evident. "Dad wouldn't do that. He respects you professionally. He said so." "Richard Prescott respects power and money," I corrected. "And he's been trying to leverage his connection to you to gain control of my biggest development project. When direct negotiation failed, he set up shell companies to try to box me in." "Did you know that?" "No," she whispered, sinking onto one of the kitchen stools. "I didn't know any of that." "Of course you didn't," I said, softer now. "Because you've been so busy becoming the perfect Prescott wife that you haven't noticed what's happening to your own mother." Tears filled her eyes. "That's not fair. I've been trying to balance everything, being a good wife, a good mother, maintaining my own career. It's not easy being part of David's world." "I know it's not," I acknowledged. "I've watched you struggle with it for years. I've watched you change, compromise, diminish parts of yourself to fit their expectations. And I've stayed largely silent because I wanted you to be happy, to have the opportunities I worked so hard to give you. So this, buying Lakewood Heights, is, what? Revenge because you had to eat in the kitchen? Because Dad tried to muscle in on your business?" Her voice had an edge now, hurt transforming to anger. I straightened, meeting her challenging gaze. "Not revenge, Eliza. Protection. I'm protecting what I built. Riverside Pines. I'm protecting my dignity by showing the Prescotts that I won't be dismissed or pushed aside. And most importantly, I'm protecting you and Thomas from a family that measures worth solely by last names and bank accounts. She stood abruptly. You had no right. This is my home. My life. David will be furious when he finds out. Yes, I agreed calmly. He probably will be. But consider this, Eliza. Your husband and his family believed they had the power to relegate me to the kitchen because they own this house, because they control the social hierarchy here. What happens now that I own not just your house, but every house in Lakewood Heights? What happens when they realize I control the very ground beneath their feet? She stared at me, realization dawning in her eyes. What are you going to do? That depends largely on them, I said. I have no intention of evicting you or changing your living situation. This isn't about hurting you or Thomas, but the Prescotts need to understand that I won't be dismissed or manipulated. Not in business and not in family matters. Eliza ran a hand through her hair, dislodging her ponytail. Mom, this is crazy. You've put millions of dollars into making some kind of point to my in-laws. What do you think this will accomplish besides creating a massive rift between all of us? I moved closer, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. Sometimes rifts already exist, Eliza. They're just hidden beneath polite smiles and careful words. Yesterday made the rift visible, that's all. And yes, I've spent millions, but it's my money to spend. Money I earned through decades of hard work, without family connections or inherited privilege. She pulled away from my touch. So that's what this is really about? You resent the Prescotts because they come from money and you don't? No, I said firmly. I resent them because they've never respected what I built, what I sacrificed to give you a better life. I resent them because they treat me as an inconvenience to be managed rather than family to be embraced. And most of all, I resent them because they're turning my daughter into someone who would ask her mother to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone in the kitchen and then defend that decision. Tears spilled down her cheeks now. That's not fair. I didn't mean to. I know you didn't, I said softly. That's the insidious thing about their world, Eliza. It changes you so gradually that you don't notice until one day you're defending behaviors you would have once found appalling. She wiped at her tears, visibly trying to compose herself. What am I supposed to tell David? How can I explain this? The truth, I suggested. That I made a business decision to purchase Lakewood Heights. The personal motivations behind it are between us, for now. Eliza looked at me, a mix of emotions crossing her face. The meeting tonight. What's going to happen? The new ownership will be announced. There will be assurances that day-to-day operations won't change dramatically, that property values will be protected, the usual corporate communications, nothing that should concern most residents. And the Prescotts? David's parents have a house 3 streets over. I nodded. I'm aware. They'll receive the same information as everyone else. She shook her head slowly. You know this won't end. Well, don't you? Dad will see this as a declaration of war. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But I didn't start this war, Eliza. I'm just finally fighting back. A small voice came from the doorway. Mommy? Why are you crying? We both turned to see Thomas standing there, clutching a stuffed dinosaur, his dark eyes wide with concern. Marina hovered anxiously behind him. I'm sorry, Mrs. Prescott, she said. He heard voices and wanted to come down. Eliza quickly wiped her face. It's okay. Thomas, Mommy's just having a grown-up talk with Nana. Everything's fine. He looked unconvinced, his gaze moving between us. Then he walked over and wrapped his small arms around Eliza's legs. Don't be sad, Mommy. She knelt down, hugging him properly. I'm not sad, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just have big feelings when they talk about important things. He nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Then he looked at me. Are you staying, Nana? Can we make cookies now? The simple question, asked with such hopeful innocence, made my throat tighten. Not today, Thomas. But very soon, I promise. Eliza stood, keeping a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Marina, would you take Thomas back upstairs? Maybe you could start that new puzzle we got last week." After they left, Eliza turned to me, her expression now carefully controlled. "I need to call David. He should hear about this from me before the meeting." I nodded. "I understand. I should go prepare for tonight. Anyway." She walked me to the door, tension evident in every line of her body. As I stepped outside, she spoke again, her voice low. "I love you, Mom, but I don't know if I can forgive you for this, not right away." I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, complicated woman I had raised alone, who now stood at the intersection of two very different worlds. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eliza. I'm asking for understanding. There's a difference." The door closed between us, and I stood for a moment on the porch of the grand house that had never felt like a home to me. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly maintained lawns of Lakewood Heights. My lawns now, my development, my small kingdom carved out of a lifetime of determination. Tonight, the Prescotts would learn what it meant to dismiss Margaret Wilson. And perhaps, in time, my daughter would understand that some battles needed to be fought, even if they left casualties in their wake. The Lakewood Heights Community Clubhouse was an architectural showpiece. Vaulted ceilings, stone fireplaces, at each end of the main hall, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. By 6:45, the room was filled with curious residents, their hushed conversations creating a steady murmur beneath the soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. I sat in the back row, watching as my employees efficiently distributed information packets and directed questions to wait for the presentation. No one paid particular attention to me. Most Lakewood Heights residents wouldn't recognize Margaret Wilson on sight, despite my prominence in Portland's business circles. That anonymity suited me perfectly tonight. At 6:58, Richard and Vivian Prescott entered, his expression imperious as he nodded to acquaintances. They took seats near the front, clearly expecting to be acknowledged by whoever was running the meeting. Minutes later, Eliza slipped in, alone, her face pale and tense. She glanced around the room, spotted me, then deliberately chose a seat, halfway between me and her in-laws. At precisely 7, Marcus Donovan stepped to the podium, his tailored suit and commanding presence immediately quieting the room. "Good evening, residents of Lakewood Heights. I'm Marcus Donovan, lead counsel for Wilson Realty Group. Thank you for attending this emergency session." Richard Prescott's head snapped up at the mention of my company, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on me. I met his stare evenly, offering a small, polite nod. Marcus continued smoothly. "As of noon today, ownership of Lakewood Heights development, including all common areas, undeveloped parcels, and controlling interest in the Homeowners Association, has transferred to Wilson Realty Group." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Several people turned to look at me, recognition dawning. "This transition will be seamless for most residents," Marcus assured them. "Your property rights remain unchanged. HOA fees will be frozen, at current rates for the next 12 months while we conduct a full assessment of services and amenities." He proceeded to outline various improvements planned for the community: enhanced landscaping, clubhouse renovations, updated security. The kinds of changes that would typically delight homeowners concerned about property values. Richard Prescott stood abruptly. "What's the meaning of this? There was no public offering, no opportunity for existing stakeholders to bid." Marcus regarded him coolly. "The transaction was private, Mr. Prescott, between Wilson Realty and the previous owners. Perfectly legal and binding." "This is an obvious retaliatory move," Richard said loudly, turning to face the crowd. "Margaret Wilson is my daughter-in-law's mother. This is personal, not business." I stood then, walking calmly to the front of the room. "Actually, Richard, it's both. Wilson Realty makes sound investments. Lakewood Heights is a premium property with excellent growth potential. The fact that my daughter and grandson live here only made it more attractive. Vivian Prescott's expression had turned glacial. She whispered something to her husband, who shook his head sharply. As for retaliation, I continued, addressing the room at large, I believe in responding proportionately to challenges, whether personal or professional. Some might call it karma. Richard's face flushed. You won't get away with this, I smiled slightly. I already have. Now, if you'll excuse the interruption, Mr. Donovan was explaining the improvements residents can expect. I returned to my seat amidst curious stares and whispers. Marcus resumed his presentation, professional as ever, while Richard remained, standing for several uncomfortable moments before finally sitting down, his posture rigid with fury. After the meeting concluded, I waited as residents filed out, many stopping to introduce themselves to me, suddenly eager to meet the new owner of their community. I exchanged pleasantries, noting the calculating looks as they reassessed who I was and what influence I might have over their carefully curated lives. Richard and Vivian departed without acknowledging me, but I could feel the weight of their glares. This battle was just beginning. Eliza approached last, her expression unreadable. David's flight lands in an hour. He's coming straight here. I expected as much, I replied. Would you like me to speak with him alone first? She shook her head. No. We'll face this together. Whatever happens. That small admission, that we would face it together, eased something tight in my chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. I'm still processing all this. I don't know if what you've done is brilliant or insane. Sometimes the line between the two is thinner than we think, I observed. We walked out together into the cool evening air. The lakefront was beautiful at night, lights from the surrounding homes reflecting on the dark water. Residents lingered in small groups, still discussing the shocking news. What happens next? Eliza asked, hugging herself against the chill. I looked out over the water, at the perfectly arranged landscape that was now mine. That depends on David and his father. Dad won't back down easily. You know that. I'm counting on it, I replied. Some men need to hit a wall before they realize they can't simply push through everything in their path. She was silent for a moment. And if that wall is me, what if I'm caught in the middle? I turned to her, seeing not just my grown daughter, but also echoes of the determined little girl who had once declared she would change the world. Then you'll have to decide where you truly stand, Eliza, not where you've been positioned by others. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, her shoulders tensing. David's landing early. He's already on his way. I nodded, straightening my spine and smoothing my jacket. Then let's wait for him at your house. I believe it's time for a long overdue family discussion. We walked to our separate cars, the weight of years of unspoken tensions and suppressed truths hanging between us. Tonight would change everything, for better or worse remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, I would never again be relegated to the kitchen by people who mistook my accommodating nature for weakness. The battle for respect had begun, and I had just made the first decisive move on a playing field that was now entirely mine.